Okay, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in the ELT week. As William said, my name's Aidan Holland. I'm working in the Assessment Solutions Department of the British Council, currently based in Spain, and I've got a range of experience in teaching, teacher training, and more recently, assessment and education reform. This session is coming from my academic and practical background as a teacher and as a assessment, more and more an assessment expert. And we're going to look at rethinking classroom assessment from theory to practice. In the session, which I've divided into three parts, there's a couple of things in Spanish there, sorry. In the first part, we're going to look at what classroom assessment is. We're going to look at a definition for it. And then we'll move on to think about what are formative and summative approaches. How can they be combined within the classroom to the benefit of the students and the teacher? In the second part, which will be interactive and we'll work with some breakout rooms, we're going to look at how classroom assessment works in practice through looking at through three different examples. And here I'll be explaining about, it's not a dichotomy of formative or summative. You don't do one or the other. They both must be placed in a harmonious position to have the best effect in the classroom, which is to promote learning at the end of the day. Then in the last part, I'm going to bring the theory and the practice together and explain why it's so important to have education systems in which we're working aligned so that the approach to classroom assessment has the maximum benefit for learning. So we're going to start with the theory. And let's start with the chat. So in the chat, I'd like you to respond to those two questions. What does assessment mean for you? And what types of assessment are you doing at the moment with your students? If you're in teacher training, what types of assessment have you seen so far in your courses? If you could pop your answers into the chat, that would be great. Good, got evaluation, yeah. Any other ideas? Okay, good. We're getting some ideas in now. So formative assessment being one type of assessment, yeah. Guidance, measuring the learning process, good. Constant monitoring, summative, evaluation, again, that's a synonym. Answering questions, yeah, questioning is really key. Assessing the different skills. Oh, good one, that. The systematic basis for making inferences about learning and development of students. Yeah, it's good. There has to be a systematic approach. This is good. Tutoring. The process of evaluating skills, providing feedback or, yeah, tracking progress, feedback, all this is good. Yeah, you've got some different types of assessment there. And measurement, yeah. Yeah, 4 skills, great. So you've got a good base to start with. So I've been involved with assessment for many years, and I have in the past been a tutor on teacher training qualifications, and I usually led on the assessment modules. And I think one of the main messages I like to transmit about assessment from the beginning is to understand how a test, the word test and assessment fit together, because a test is a form of assessment, but as I can see in the chat, and an assessment isn't, and most shouldn't, always be a test. Assessment is much more than just a test. One of the problems that we have in many education systems is people get obsessed with tests and they think assessment must involve a test, a sit-down test when everyone's quiet and they're answering multiple choice questions, this classic format that we have in mind. But modern assessment approaches mean that we can only be doing this a very small amount of the time. It does have its place somewhere, but as I can see in the chat, you're very aware of formative, diagnostic assessments that are focused on the student and their learning. And this is really key in this session. I hope if you just take one thing away, that it's an even more clearer view of how important it is to, for the most of the time, focus assessments on students' learning in the classroom environment, and understand that summative tests are not bad, but they must be used with care within a classroom situation. So good. We've got I have a definition here in Spanish, which I'd like you to just skim for 5 seconds. Two key researchers here, a quite concise, nice little definition, which relates to one of your comments in the chat about having a systematic approach to assessment. So assessment can be, and all assessment, including tests, self-peer assessments, observations, can follow these 3 steps. It's the process of obtaining information, making an evaluation based off of that information, and then taking a decision as a result. Let's put this into some concrete examples. Let's think of the most informal assessment that you can do and that you probably do every day, observing students doing a task. When you set up, say, a speaking task in class, you'll be monitoring. You're getting information from the students to see how well they're doing it. You're making an evaluation automatically to decide, do I need to repeat this activity? Do I need to repeat this activity and ask them to focus on a specific thing? Or can I progress to the next stage of their learning? Can I progress to the next objective on the curriculum or the course? Here we've got an example of how you're going through the obtaining information, making your evaluation, and then making a decision. If we move it slightly more towards, and that example I just gave was clearly focused on learning, because your main prerogative is to support the students in developing their speaking in that example. If we take it slightly more formal, maybe you've covered the topic of sustainability in your class, and you've worked on it for 3 weeks, and they've got some nice. They've developed all the 4 skills. They've developed grammatical structures and vocabulary around that. And at the end of the 3 weeks, you give them a test, which has a reading element and maybe some vocabulary. Here we obtain information about their ability to understand the text on the topic that they've been learning about, and would understand how much vocabulary they have related to that topic. And then the decision would be, will they need any revision or not? Again, that could be very much focused on the students themselves, because the students could be directed to extension tasks, revision tasks, or reinforcing tasks, depending on how well they did on that informal test. A third example, which is more formal, is maybe when you use a more summative achievement test at the end of a course to see how well the students have processed all of the content of the course, and you give them a grade that they would have. It may be a go to the next level or go to the next year. Here we're obtaining information, making an evaluation, and taking a decision. And it can work on many different levels of formality. The first 2 examples that I gave I think I would stress that they're focused on learning. There should not be no stress for the students there. It should help them to advance. The third example is necessary for reporting because they spent maybe 150 hours learning English over the course of a year. They need some kind of formal certification afterwards. We're going to be unpacking these as we go through the session. So there are multiple opportunities for assessment in the classroom. The picture that we see on the screen is what's not exhaustive, but equally, we shouldn't be doing all of these tests all of the time. The teacher or the institution or the national education system would hopefully choose specific approaches to assessment that would be relevant for local contexts. I've put all of them on the screen so that we can see how we can make some different, we can draw some different themes from them. So let's start with these type of tests: baseline, placement, proficiency. Now, these type of tests are probably a test is a form of assessment. Assessment isn't always a form of a test, as I've said. The traditional formatted tests, hopefully 4 skills with different sections and maybe a section on grammar and vocabulary, which are standardized and have been through a rigorous process of standardization and quality control, are probably what most non-experts would say if you ask them what is assessment. This is the first thing that comes to their mind. As teachers, we know that this isn't the case, but these are the most common ones. And their main use is to inform about the level of ability of the student for some reason. This normally gets translated into a number or a grade or some kind of formal alphanumeric score. This can be done at the beginning, maybe midpoints or at specific points within a course, beginning, middle, or end, in order to decide maybe where to place a student, in order to decide where a student is now so they can be retested later to understand how much they've advanced in the course, or at the end of the course to give an independent evaluation of where they stand in terms of the objectives of the curriculum. And again, these are normally used in a summative way. However, if you're preparing the students for these exams in class, you might use them formatively, where they take the test and then they look at the results together to understand which parts they find more difficult. This is a formative use of a test which will later be done in a summative way. The second group are better called activities than tests because they don't have a test-like format. They may be questionnaires or checklists, and they involve making diagnostics or doing self or peer assessments in the class to support the students' understanding how well they did something so that they can reflect and identify how they can do it better the next time through the assessment for learning cycle. This really serves to support learning and progress of the students. The third category of tests, such as quiz, progress, achievement, are normally so directly associated with the course content that they can support both of the other themes. So they could be used to support learning, or they can be used to inform, maybe at specific points in the course. So maybe quiz 1 and progress 1 support learning, quiz 2 and progress 2 are reported back to the parents to see how they're going, but they're done in a more informal way. So here, the points I'd like to reinforce are: tests can be oriented formatively or summatively. Second, some tests are naturally more orientated or are used more in a summative way, and some activity types are used more in a formative way. However, that's not a fixed rule. They can be, you can, for example, use a self-assessment in some kind of formative way if your assessment system was set up in such a way as to be able to do that. So to summarize, some of the qualities of a formative approach, it's continuous. So we're doing it probably in every class at some level. Just observing your students is a form of assessment. Therefore, we always observe our students, so it's done in every class. As formative assessments become more formalized, they're done less frequently, but it's still quite it's a regular activity in the courses. It's focused on the student because it's focused on the learning. It's supporting the students to understand how well they did something so that they can reflect on it and think of objectives to do it better the next time. It's adaptive. It's adaptive both for the teacher and for the student. The teacher uses the information that the formative assessment gives to adapt future teaching, to make it more relevant to the student, who can also adapt their approach, given that they're more aware of how well they're doing activities from one moment to the next. Summative assessment, however, is done at specific points in the course, like I've said, beginning, maybe midpoint and end point. It's focused on reports. It's focused on a snapshot of the learner's ability at one point in time, and unfortunately, it's quite decisive. So they do well or not. They don't have the opportunity to reflect, set learning objectives, and do it better the next time. So it's much more fixed. This doesn't mean by any means that it's bad, as long as it's integrated correctly with the course, and we're going to look at some examples of that now. It can provide a very strong motivation for successful learning if formative assessment is the basis and the summative assessment is placed at the right point and combined in the right way. Let's move into some practical examples of classroom assessment. And within classroom assessment, remember, I'm talking about many different types of assessment, many different types of contexts and systems, and the fact that teachers can combine a formative and summative approach as they feel appropriate. So imagine this is an assessment task. You ask the students to do a 2-minute speaking presentation on a topic that the student has researched. Would this be formative or summative? What do you think? Any thoughts in the chat? It's a bit of a trick question. I saw one of you put both. Oh, three boths. It can be both. This is what I'm trying to, I hope to be able to illustrate now in this second part of the presentation. Assessments are not, formative or summative is not a quality of the assessment, but how it's used. So to take this example, imagine you're doing a course which has a strong element of presentation skills for the students. Over the course of 12 weeks, you ask the students to participate in to research and present 3 times during the 12-week period. After each time, they self-reflect and peer reflect and identify areas that they can improve in the next presentation that they do. So that's done in a cyclical style, so that after each presentation, they get rich, meaningful feedback for themselves. No other judgment than that is made. The only information the students are receiving is that is from themselves, how well they think they did, and from the peers, how well the peer thinks they did, and probably some feedback from the teacher as well. But it's not translated into any kind of grade or formal assessment. After the 3, at the end of the course, they could be asked to do a 4th presentation in which the teacher gives them a formal grade for how they do the presentation, to see how much they've learned through the formative approaches from before. So yeah, this is a good comment. And the last one, it depends on the teacher's intention and the student's need. So with my example there, you've got 4 presentations, 3 of which were formatively focusing on the learning, The last one was summatively focused, in which they get a grade. But as we built it up over the course of 3 months, they've had plentiful, rich feedback and meaningful support to be as successful as possible on the last assessment, which is logical to follow the same format. So it's very much how the teacher focuses the assessment task. It's not a quality of the task itself. Let's look at this in practice. We're going to look at 3 different classroom-based assessment scenarios, and I want you to think about where you would place them, each of them on the Venn diagram. Now, I've used a Venn diagram because we need to be combining formative and summative approaches to assessments in the classroom to make them both more meaningful and to support in general learning. Formative purely supports learning and improvement. Summative reports, but it also gives the formality and the stress and the importance of these punctual times in the class, which they can work towards and apply all of the learning that they've had. So they're necessary to come together. We're going to look at 3 examples. We'll look at the first one together, and then we'll look at 2 and 3 in breakout rooms when you can discuss what you think of the approach and where it would fit in terms of the Venn diagram. Let's look at the first one. I'll give you 10 seconds to read that, then I'll read it out. So scenario 1 is called the final before the final. Miss Jones gives a final exam 2 weeks in advance of the end of term. Those students who do not pass the exam then spend the next 2 weeks identifying and closing gaps in their knowledge as they prepare to retake the test. The second test is a different version of the test, which has the same learning targets. Those students who pass the exam the first time move on to enrichment activities. To a surprise, many students who pass the exam the first time choose to support and coach a student who didn't pass as their extended learning opportunity. Now, if we've got the 3 areas here, would you say this was more, whether this situation would be placed in the formative sphere, the summative sphere, or somewhere in the middle? Okay, we've got summative, formative, got more formative, both. Yeah, using formative, that's the idea. Using formative, we have a comment, it makes the summative easier to evaluate. It makes it easier to be successful in the summative, which is what we want. We don't want our students to fail. So we need the formative to really be the foundation on which the individual summative assessment is placed. Now, you can see there's clearly a formative element to this, but it is in the middle. If we're thinking about it's an end of term exam, which will be assigned a grade and reported to parents, probably. That's what they know, what normally happens. This teacher has moved the exam forward 2 weeks to give any students who aren't successful the first time a second opportunity. So they're framing a summative assessment and fully scaffolding it in a formative approach. So it's in the middle. The students are given she's giving the students as much opportunity as possible to be successful and to perform to the best of their ability in the end of term assessment. So it's not just one opportunity. So here we can see how we're combining a formative and summative approach on an end of term test to make it highly likely that the students will perform as well as they can. Now, We're going to repeat this in breakout rooms. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms and then share 2 further scenarios. Read the scenarios and decide whether they fit in more formative, more summative, or in the middle. Am I doing the breakout rooms?
No, don't worry. We're
Oh, you're
doing it
doing it.
right now. Yeah.
Okay. We'll probably have 3 to 5 minutes for this.
Yeah, we should plan in 5 minutes. We're still in the process of in the progress to breakout rooms, I guess. At least that's what my screen says here.
Does it take time to put the people in the rooms?
Now they are all set. Definitely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're starting now.
People need to accept, don't they?
I guess so. Yeah.
Says all breakout rooms will close in 30 seconds.
No. That's it.
No. Yeah, it does on my screen, yeah.
Gisa and Martin, can we double check that? I guess it
Yeah.
was programmed for 30 seconds. It was,
That's true.
Henry, por favor.
Let's wait the return and send it again.
yeah, los breakout rooms tienen que tener una duración de 5 minutos, por favor.
No, sí, lo que he hecho es cerrarlo para volver a abrir para que ingresen automáticamente, porque nadie estaba entrando.
Oh, ok. No estaban aceptando, ¿no? Tal vez habría que
Exacto,
decirles
por eso
eso.
lo voy a volver a abrir para que entren automáticamente.
Perfecto. Gise, si podrías compartir el mensaje de que van a ser redireccionados automáticamente a los breakout rooms.
Listo, ya está. Con Martín y yo vamos a ir pasando por las salas y dejándoles los escenarios.
Have you put the examples in?
Yeah, 2 scenarios?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
How many rooms have we got?
20.
All right. That's great.
We don't know if they're discussing it.
Yeah, I guess we should drop by in the rooms just to see if there is discussion. and there's some action there.
It's hard with if there's more than 3 or 4 people, I find it hard. That someone says
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, they can read it, and then if they want to comment on it, then they can.
It's been some time that I haven't used Zoom or the
Okay, shall I start again? Yeah. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for that break. I hope you've had the chance to at least read through the 2 scenarios. Let's move to scenario 2. So here we've got homework as optional. The teacher here uses homework as an optional tool to give students practice before their final exam. He lets the students say that if they don't feel sure about the content of the exam, that they can use the homework as evidence to later affect the grade that they're given in the exam. So here we can see that it's while it's optional, it serves a clear purpose if they don't perform as well as they think they should have at the end of the course. Here, I haven't put the arrow right in the middle because it wasn't like they could take the exam 2 times, but the homework served a primarily formative function so that they could do it if they felt it was necessary. If they had felt that they didn't understand a particular topic, they could do the homework, save it as evidence, and use it at a later date. If they felt they understood something, the homework is optional, so it wasn't necessary for them to do it. In this case, the homework being used as evidence to affect the performance on the exam at the end of the term means that it falls in the formative summative sphere. So the work that they're doing when they want for homework can be used for a clear purpose to boost their performance on the final exam. Great. In the third scenario, the teacher's aware of how difficult it is to correct learning when something hasn't been learned correctly or fully. It's much difficult to correct it than by eliciting what the students have doubts about at the current moment in time. So this teacher, when they give the homework, it splits the group of students into three groups. So some of them, if they don't feel sure, they can create questions about the topics. If they feel that they don't understand at all, they can just write the list of their doubts. If they feel confident with it, they can continue on. So this is an example of a purely formative approach. So it basically means students are set homework and they're split into those who understand some, and those who don't understand any. And depending on which group they ought to evaluate themselves into, they're given a task to do. So they either write further questions that will appear in the exam, they'll write the doubts that they have, or they'll stop and they'll request more support. In this case, it's purely focused on the learning of the students. So we've got a more formative example here. At the end here, it's interesting. I've purposefully chosen not to include any only summative examples. Why? As teachers, I think, well, I know we should be primarily concerned with promoting learning. Learning occurs when we take a formative approach to assessment. That doesn't mean we won't be doing summative assessments, but the summative assessments that we do are always going to fall into that sphere in the middle. So we need to support students to be as successful as possible in the summative assessments. And that's my last two points. A couple of things in the chat. Formative assessment generally low stakes and not graded for final scores. Yeah, I might disagree with low stakes, because the idea of stakes for me is contentious, because I think all exams are high stakes. And if you think about it, if a formative assessment has the power to influence a person's ability, their self-image, this is quite high stakes. So we want to make sure that we're giving it's done in a very as supportive way as possible. It's clear that it's less high stakes than doing the IELTS to get into university, but still it has a repercussion on people's lives, and it's important to remember that as well. But very good comments about it's used to guide improvement, innovative ways to assess students. It's all about combining it properly. So just to make conclusions on the second part, being formative or summative is not a quality of the assessment, but how it's used. And the same assessment task can be given a formative or a summative slant, depending on how you want to use them. In the system of classroom assessment, teachers will be rarely expected to create objective standalone summative assessments. And this is where what I mean by this is most teachers aren't creating assessments that would sit outside of the classroom environments that they work in. The assessments that they do use should be fully integrated into the formative approach so that students can be successful, which is the key message. Now, part 3, towards a framework for classroom assessment. Here we're going back to a bit of theory. The importance of alignment and an education system. So an education system can be represented by this diagram. An education system can be seen to have 3 elements. Firstly, curriculum. That would involve the curricula and the syllabi with the objectives of the course that are used to inform the development of materials and assessment systems. Second, instruction. Instruction is basically the experience within the physical educational institution, the school. This would involve learning materials, teacher training, and the realization of learning in the physical place. Third, assessment. The assessment system is the system of classroom assessment that's used to support learning and report on the success of the learning. So these 3 elements are present in all learning systems, whether they're a private class, a group of students, a school, a national authority, a region, a country. It can be had on many levels, but we always see these 3 elements. In order for these systems to be effective, they must be all 3 of them must be aligned to the same set of standards. And by standards, we're thinking about a clear set of objectives that we're teaching at defined levels of ability. And let's think of an example here. Imagine your assessed writing class were this. Students are asked to invent a simple board game. in the task, they have to think of the rules of the board game and write a paragraph which explains the rules of the board game. Now, however you set that up, that's going to be one of the assessed tasks on your communicative course. So thinking about that in the context of a learning system, this assessment task would fit within probably a communicative curriculum in which writing's used to transmit messages. Also, this curriculum would see writing as an integrated skill, which uses grammatical and lexical systems, but also requires specific organization for different genres and registers, and has to achieve certain objectives. If the curriculum perceives writing as this, instruction must teach writing like this. So teachers need to be trained in how to teach writing effectively in this way, to understand writing as an integrated skill. And the materials that teachers use must support teachers to be able to develop those skills in students. In order for the students to learn, the assessment system, both the formative, which is focused on learning, and the summative, which is focused on reporting, need to be harmonious with the writing tasks that they do during their learning. Hence, an integrated skills task with a clear objective. So in this way, this is how this type of task would fit within a learning system. So here's an actual example of a student's production to that task. This is from another project I worked on a few years ago. Read it and just think, is it good? What do you think? Yeah, quite good. Heading. This is a trick question. How can I, it's a trick question and it's unfair to you. How can I ask you to say, yeah, what level? How can I ask you to say whether it's good when I haven't told you what level it is and I haven't told you anything about what that level means? That's the key question. This is why we need standards. It's actually a B1 level in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Now, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages is one potential standard that can be used to construct education systems. It can be used to construct a curriculum. It can be used to construct the objectives of that curriculum and the nature of the course. It can be used to inform delivery. It can be used to inform teacher training. It can be used to inform the materials development, and what it's been used mostly for is to inform the assessment systems. The Common European Framework is one potential framework, and you may have other frameworks depending on your region of the world, and you might develop your own local framework. These are all relevant, but what's important is that you have a central document which says what the skills are and what are the different levels for the skills. Now, if I were to tell you, the example you read was corresponding to a B1 student, you'd want to know what's B1 and what specific descriptor in B1 are we going to test. And this is where we would come in to use the concrete criteria from the standard. In this example, I'll give you 10 seconds just to read that. The criteria here that we can see, the principal criteria here that we can see in blue is generic, but it's very specific as well. So it's a B1 descriptor for a specific type of writing. Rules are a bit like similar to notes. It's not an abstract topic, which would be more corresponding to B2 and above, but it does require the student to be able to get their point over comprehensively. So that's why this is the best descriptor from the CEFR that represents that task. Teachers can be supported by thinking, they read the example, they look at the descriptor, they think, does the example focus on the content? Yes, it does. Does it focus on a range of sentences related to concrete situations? Yes, quite well. Are frequently used structures generally accurate? Yeah, they do that very well, actually. They use basic linking words and it's comprehensible. So if we're to grade this on one of three levels, where we can say, well, we're answering no to some on all of the questions, that would be, it's not quite meeting that criteria. If we answer yes to all of them, we can say, yeah, it's meeting it. If we say yes very well to some or all, it's actually going beyond this. So this is a very, while this is a summative approach, because they're being given a clear evaluation at the end of the day, it fits well within a formative approach to the class, because they may have been asked to do similar tasks previously, and then for this one they're actually given a formal grade by the teacher. And more importantly, the teacher's able to give this type of feedback to the students. This is actually for a teacher standardization session, but you can see that the feedback's very specific, measurable, action-bound, realistic. It's very, very focused on the nature of the task, not some subjective opinion about a teacher who hasn't been given any particular criteria. Yeah, I can show the PDFs, yeah. So, coming to the end there, a framework for classroom assessment. Point 1, you need standards. The CEFR is one standard, it's a useful standard, but any set of local, national or international standards can be used. This needs to inform everything: curriculum, delivery, and assessment. For assessment, which is what we're concerned with in this session, teachers need to take a largely formative approach. They can use quizzes, progress tests, which are similar in format, a bit less formal than to normal tests, but also the other really good assessment tools and activities such as observation, self-peer assessment, and reflection. This is what's done most of the time. Why? To improve learning. Summative focus is done at snapshot points in the course, and the aim of the formative focus is to make their performance on the summative tests, when they're done, as likely as possible to be the best version of themselves. And this would include traditional tests such as placement wouldn't be in learning, but achievement and proficiency tests. Out of those three, obviously you can't prepare a student for a placement test, but achievement test, yes. This is probably the most common type of test that you'd be working towards after a semester or a year of academic study. So my recommendations, just to repeat: teach to clear standards, align the education system, and focus on assessment for learning mostly. Thank you.
Massive thanks to you, Aidan. Thank you very much for sharing such important insights. We definitely think that there is a long road, still a long road, not only in Peru, but I would say worldwide in terms of assessment literacy. There are so many aspects that need to accompany teachers in this process of develop capacity to apply this new paradigm for assessment that is linking more closely the teaching and assessment. No,
Yeah.
we could see several comments there that seem to be in full agreement with that. No, contrary to what used to happen in the past, which was primarily assessment for summative processes. Yes.
Well, I will share the PowerPoint, the latest version of the PowerPoint with you, and you can send it to everyone.
Yes, we have some times. Maybe there are some questions in the chat that you could address.
Sure.
So our audience, I bet there will be an explosion of questions there. Questions and comments. They enjoyed your presentation. Very thankful. If there is one, there was one question. I don't know if it was stated in terms of a question like some minutes ago. And they said that about the examples that you presented, that sometimes it was better to not to start like sort of having a task completed without making sure that previous support was given, because these early mistakes might sort of remain fossilized.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, I mean, that's just an example of activities or teaching activities that you do, like questioning, observation, or questioning observation, what we do in every class. And they are a form of assessment. So really to think about the questions that you're asking the students and getting the students to ask questions back to you is a really great way of seeing where they are in their understanding or their ability somewhere. Actually, someone asked for more examples of formative assessment. A lot of the examples that I've used come from an academic paper, which I can share with you, and people can read it at their leisure. It has some nice, in fact, very better, more useful than the presentation itself. For that, yeah.
Well, I guess if there are no further questions, we can, I guess, let you
Go to bed.
And yes, this is bedtime for you. We really appreciate your presence. I guess you have started a conversation that will continue today in the next
Absolutely.
part, which we will be discussing about rubrics, but basically for class observation in the initial teacher training system. And I bet what you have provided as input here will be a great would be great insights to start from in the coming moment, and also be revisiting along the year. This would be a great moment also to mention the participation and the support from the Directorate for Initial Teacher Training. We've got a specialist in English language teacher training. And this presentation is actually being broadcasted or streamed through their channels. And it will be great to resort to some more of your resources in the future, so we could help with more opportunities for this continuous learning, capacity building process, where the DFOA or the Directorate for Initial Teacher Training is involved.
Right. I'll send you that article and
Oh, this is an interesting question, and we could take advantage of the last 2 minutes that we have with you. How can formative assessment be effectively applied for 45 students? I bet you have some brilliant ideas around that.
It is, the more students that you have in the class, the more difficult, the more challenging it is for you to capture the information. So it's really important to train the students and give them achievable activities. So here we're thinking for formative and summative assessments are the answer. But you're going to say, but how do I know that they're going to take them seriously through the summative assessment. So you need to make sure that they, again, if we go back to my example of the presentations, 12 weeks, 4 presentations, 3 are formatively assessed. So the students have to do peer and self-evaluation, and they're clearly aware that the skills that they're developing in those 3 will help them be as successful as possible in the 4th. So this is an example of how summative assessment can have an extremely positive force on the students' willingness to do the formative assessment. If the students are reluctant to do the formative assessment, you can give the formative assessments a summative angle. So only on submitting if they submit their 3 self-assessments, they get a 5% increase on their final grade. So thinking of ways of leveraging summative assessment in the classroom to get them to engage with the formative approach, which I fully agree with can be challenging. And I have another article on that if you want me to send that.
Great. Well, I guess we have gone past the time, but it would be also great to take advantage of your kind time now. How about providing with feedback for a large number like that? What alternatives could teachers or teacher trainers have? Would group feedback be something important to resort to, or peer feedback?
Feedback is if you're working with objectives, like I've suggested, and you're working with a set of standards, and you're able to focus on specific can-dos, maybe 1, 2, or 3 can-dos that are related to, and we're talking about productive skills here. The feedback that you would give students in a class which all has a similar level is going to be quite similar. The students who did it, who struggled, the students are doing it okay, and the students who are doing it in an excellent way. So the real key here is to make sure that everything's focused on a specific objective from the beginning. If we're just doing speaking to give opinions, this is still too vague. This needs to be speaking, an aspect of speaking at a specific level. Is it abstract? Is it familiar? What's the topic? What's the vocabulary sets and the grammatical structures, to make it as specific as possible so that you don't have to, so that something's always relevant for all of the students. So it's really linked to having clear standards and focusing on specific elements of those standards.